Thank you for joining us for Keeping New Mexico Schools Safe Requirements for Developing Your Safe Schools Plan. Now I'd like to introduce a speaker. Melanie Granito is Safe Schools State Coordinator with New Mexico Public Education Department. Prior to joining the NMPED Safe and Healthy Schools Bureau, Melanie spent over 15 years in Santa Fe Public Schools as a coach, teacher, and a high school principal. Melanie has a wealth of experience overseeing safety and security measures in various school settings.
Thank you, Leah, for that introduction. Good morning, participants. As Leah said, I'm Melanie Granito, PED Safe School State Coordinator, and you're in my session, Keeping New Mexico Schools Safe. So if you are in my session, it means probably your Safe Schools Plan is up for review. And this session will provide some overview and direction. Let me start off by saying, as Leah said, I have been a coach, I have been a teacher, and I have been a high school principal, very much involved with the school setting. And I used to say, as a high school principal, I had two eyes on education. One, as an instructional coach, that's my passion. That's why I got into education. I wanted to be a part of teaching, learning, and engaging students. And then my other eye was on managing a school campus, right? We have to manage the day-to-day operations. And very quickly, some priorities rose to the top, one being school safety. And so very quickly, I had to build my capacity and all that with school safety to ensure that my students and staff were safe, because we know when students feel safe, they're more engaged in school, as well as our staff. My role now as Safe Schools Coordinator is to have oversight of the approval process of your Safe Schools plans, provide technical support, and whatever professional development you need to build your capacity. So please, 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 I'll keep reiterating this throughout my presentation, use me as a resource. The objectives for this session, again, to provide guidance and resources for schools and community partners to make Safe Schools Plan a collaborative effort. You want to make sure various agencies, various people are at the table as you inform your Safe Schools Plan, and we'll go through that process together. To support schools at each step of the way as they develop their Safe Schools Plans to address an all types of hazard approach and be tailored to fit each school's individual needs. And notice how tailored to fit each school's individual needs is bolded and underlined, and we'll go through that. And then, of course, to assist school staff in developing their roles as immediate responders. Just a quick overview. The state requires that every school have a Safe Schools Plan. Since 2008, PED has required all schools, as part of your school wellness plan, to develop a school safety plan. And you'll notice that school safety plan is interchanged with emergency operation plans, EOPs. So this policy is per the New Mexico Administrative Code 6.12.6. So you'll create a school wellness policy, and you will not embed your safety plan within that. It'll be a standalone document. The Safe Schools Guidance document, you'll see a picture there, and of course I'm going to hold up one. This particular one really does a deep dive in providing resources, explanations, definitions of everything you need to embed in your Safe Schools plans. And so I'll be referring to this and providing a copy to you come August, as the final 2020 version will be ready for publication. You probably received an email from me early this summer to notify you and give you the heads up that your Safe School Plan for your particular school is due December 5th. So we have a few months to work together to refine and continue to develop that Safe Schools Plans, with approximately 6 elements we'll review today, 7 assurances. Know that PED reviews Safe Schools Plans every 3 years. We're on a 3-year cycle. So currently we're on cycle 3, year 2. So if you're sitting in this presentation and receive an invite from me, you are a year 2 school under review. How we inform the Safe Schools document I refer to is using the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, FEMA's guiding documents. These are available on our website. for your review to, again, do a deep dive in what is involved in developing your Safe Schools plan, or of course, refer to what PED has provided in our guidance document. I also want to mention that PED has many partners at the table as well that informs our Safe Schools plan. I work closely with what's called a Safe School Advisory Council, made up of the Attorney General's Office, Department of Health, Department of Public Safety, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, our New Mexico Homeland Security Office, the U.S. Department of Education REM Center, our Public Insurance Authority, Palms and Associates. So please know that PED does not work in isolation as we develop our guidance document, that we definitely collaborate with multi-agencies to inform it. In addition, I host a Safe Schools work group made up of superintendents, principals, district safety directors, school nurses, emergency managers, again, Palms and Associates, and they help with the revisions. So just very much as you sit in the roles you do, sometimes as we put out documents, there are questions and or reflection of what makes most sense to school districts. So we also have those particular individuals at the table with us, guiding the developments and refinements of our Safe Schools documents. So I wanted to pause for a moment and take you through the preparedness cycle. We're going to go through each of these elements in depth, but I want you to keep an eye on what the Safe Schools plan is asking of you. When you look at the preparedness cycle from prevention to recovery, your role as you refine and design your Safe Schools plan is when we talk about prevention, mitigation, and protection, you really have to articulate and reflect, what does my school actually do? And then as you get to response and recovery, how did you articulate your intended response and recovery? So it's almost like just give us the facts, right? And so even though your district may have its own district guiding documents, your Safe Schools plans is giving us that detail. So it's really important to continue to go back and think through prevention, mitigation, and protection. What did we actually do? Did I articulate it well of all our due diligence and measures we've taken in this preparedness cycle? And how have I trained and developed our response and recovery? Please keep that in mind as we go through each of the elements. So I'd like to run a few polls and kind of assess your experience and expertise with the Safe School Plan document. So first question, is this your first experience supporting designing the Safe Schools Plan? The second question is, have you previously used NMPD's Planning for Safe Schools Guide and FEMA's document to guide the development of your Safe Schools Plan? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar are you with PED's Safe Schools Plan requirements? 10 being very familiar. So great, looks like we have some experience with the documents. Others that may want to utilize a resource in depth, or myself, and a mixed bag of familiar with PED's requirements. So you're in the right spot. As we go through each slide, please take some notes of where you may have additional questions, or where you may need to collaborate with me to provide some additional training. And that's the partnership you and I will have throughout the year. So in the chat box, there is a link to the Safe Schools rubric. This is where myself and other reviewers will assess your Safe Schools plan according to this rubric. And so I always call this our quick glance. I use this often to articulate each of the required elements. So I encourage you to download the Safe Schools rubric, because it's going to guide our conversation today. And again, this is the requirements of the Safe Schools plan. So you want to make sure as you're reviewing your Safe Schools plan and matching it up to the Safe Schools rubric, that they're equally matched, so that you have a successful review. And again, identify where there's areas in which you need some support. So I'm going to stand for questions. Any questions on the overview? Leah is monitoring the chat room, so I can answer 1 or 2 questions before we dive into each of the sections. Let's dive into section 1. This is a quick overview of what you would need to include in your section 1 introduction of your Safe Schools plan. And we're going to go over each of these elements on a separate slide. So your school safety committee, which could also be some members of your incident command team. I know in smaller schools we have dual roles. But if you look at the column on the left, I call those the immediate responders. Everyone that is on that school campus, from your principals all the way down to your students. I call you immediate responders because your role as you design your Safe Schools plan is thinking through not only your preventative, protective, mitigation measures, but as immediate responders, your job is to develop those responses to put enough threat and distance between you, to put enough barriers and distance between you and that threat, right? So you're the ones who are going to have to immediately understand what threat or hazard is impacting your students, your campus, your staff. Put those measures in place before, when you look at the right column, those first responders get to you, right? From district personnel to your local emergency manager to those first responders. So as you look at these 2 columns, it's a real collaborative effort. And I encourage, not only does your school staff and students have to be well aware of response, so does your first responders, and then you're going to inform that unified command. I want to highlight that one of the requirements of your Safe Schools committee is to have that special education expert sitting on your committee. Again, that's going to inform your actual, your functional, your special ed needs and resources that you need to provide in case of an emergency. Your Safe Schools committee is going to look at an all hazards approach. So when PED, Homeland Security, FEMA is saying this is an all hazards approach, what does that mean? I know as a school administrator, sometimes these terms they throw at me, I needed them to dissect a little bit more for me. So let's go through what an all hazards approach is. FEMA categorizes it in 4 different categories. The first one is natural hazards. These ones I feel like we can prepare and respond as best we can. These are the ones we're most familiar with, from our floods, fires, snow, windstorm, maybe accidents on campus. And so I know that you have some solid protocol in place to respond to such threats. The second category is technological hazards, right? And so from looking at accidental releases of hazardous materials, water failures, maybe there's an explosive of some kind. These are things that, again, you'd have to consider if these threats were to impact your campus, how would you respond? The next one, biological hazards, right? We're in the throes of that currently. So those infectious and communicable diseases, all the way down again to toxic materials present maybe in school laboratories. And the fourth category, I always say as a teacher, as a principal, these are the ones that kept me up at night, right? Are human-caused threats, from active shooter all the way down to suicide. So with these ones, it's really critical to also use some of your data, especially your code of conduct data, when you start to plan and look at kind of areas where you might be most impacted with that human threat element, things of that nature, to put some extra protective measures in place. So that rounds out the all hazards approach. Just want you to keep that in mind. Then in the introduction, after you have articulated who sits on your Safe Schools committee, there are a series of assurances. If you look at the list of assurances, these are policies, procedures that you have to have in place at your school per rule, per statute, that help shape the guidance of your Safe Schools plan. Now, because these are as well as some lengthy documents, you do not have to embed the actual policies and procedures. You will have to sign a 1-page assurance for each of these just indicating that these are in place, embedded, and implemented effectively on your campus. We're going to go over emergency drills here in the next slide, but I want to call your attention to the review, revise, and sharing of the plan. You are going to have multiple agencies sign off on your Safe Schools plans. And so hopefully you already have some collaborative partnership with your local fire department, your local law enforcement agency, and your emergency manager. If you're new to your role and you haven't formed those collaborative partnerships, I encourage you to start reaching out to them. They will have to sign off on your Safe Schools plan, and you'll have to include their name, title, and of course the agency in which they represent. So I'm going to spend some time on the emergency drill requirements. As you know, as of last July, those drills have changed. So you are required within the first 4 weeks of school to do 1 active shooter drill, 1 evacuation drill, and 2 fire drills. You are to ask a member of the fire department to participate in those drills to provide some guidance and expertise in that drill, and then conduct 4 additional drills throughout the year. Well, now that we're not starting school on time, that's easier said than done, right? So please just keep in mind that your assurance is in good faith that when you do start kind of live instruction in school and students are allowed back on your campus, that you still are required to conduct those drills. So of course, PED understands that we're going to have to give some allowance here. But as you conduct those required drills, we provided some guidance to continue to be aware of in our current state of affairs, continuing to maintain the social distancing. You might want to consider new and additional evacuation sites. You might want to rotate or do some small groups and alternate the movement of these drills with students, just as long as students and staff have an opportunity to practice. Of course, we want to wear masks. You might want to identify one-way hallways or avenues to avoid those congested areas and be purposeful in your paths. And of course, always encouraging the hand washing and hand sanitizing stations maybe you have en route, or maybe your teachers carry a bottle or so. Just really trying to make sure you're taking those extra precautions. And then that rounds out the section 1 of developing your Safe Schools plans. Any questions on the first section of your Safe Schools plan?
We do have some questions. They want to know what program to use to make the map of your school.
Usually they do the Google Maps. And so I'll see 2 different things. So when you look at the floor plan and the utility layout, I just see blueprints that are minimized and submitted. And then for that bird's eye view, it's kind of that aerial Google map. And when you go to your Safe Schools guidance document that PED has published, we'll give some details of how to go about that. If you feel like you're getting stuck, I'm here to help you kind of think through that and what you have available to you. Section 2 of your Safe Schools plan. Now remember, these are things that are actually available to students, things that you're actually doing in protocol and processes in which you have established. Now, as I go through these, if you're saying, oh, we might want to meet with a few people because there's some work to be done here, take this opportunity to reflect. So the first thing the Safe Schools rubric asks is provide information on your school health-based centers, your school-based health centers, and any health-based centers in your community, right? What do parents and students have access to in the immediacy? And then it's going to ask you in the next section of your Safe Schools plan is to develop your infectious and communicable disease plan. And you'll usually partner with the Department of Health. There is guidance and resources as we partner with the Department of Health to help shape this area. You're going to identify your key personnel roles and responsibilities should this type of threat or hazard impact your students. What is your normal protocol and any written resources you provide to parents? Now, I know with COVID-19, these are being revised as we have obviously been impacted at a great level, and you're more aware maybe of more refinement of this area of your Safe Schools plan. But I do want to caution you that you do have some reentry documents PED is asking you to really develop with a great deal of information, and then you have your Safe Schools plan. So you really want to, in your Safe Schools plan, is to articulate in detail kind of your response and approaches and who's involved, but kind of balance that out a bit. There's, I don't want to duplicate efforts, I guess for lack of a better word. And so just this piece of infectious and communicable disease plans, as you look at our guidance document, look at your resources with the Department of Health, is just as you would COVID, the flu, any other infectious and communicable diseases that would impact your campus. So you're going to refine this at some level, but a lot of other detail will find itself in those reentry documents. So I know that's going to be a tricky balance as you move forward with this section. And again, myself, Department of Health are there to help guide the development if you so need it. The next section is your articulation of your behavioral and mental health programs, your links to community resources, your school-based programs, especially in kind of the social and emotional aspect. Again, when you think of preventative, if you think of that human element primarily, what are those resources you really provide to students and staff? And that's looking at other activities. When you look at preventing, it's trying to redirect those negative energies, right? Really providing some tools and resources for staff and students to use. And so as you look at our guidance document, it'll kind of lay out some examples that you may have already implemented in your schools or things to consider. Also considering with certain activities on campus, conflict resolution, mentoring, restorative justice practices, again, those things that help develop our students in redirecting those harmful or negative energies. And then we get into your suicide prevention awareness, prevention protocol and response plan. Again, there's a detailed outline in support of that work with PED and the Department of Health. You have to identify who sits on your crisis intervention team, the training that's provided to them, the protocol in which they take should they be aware of a student harming themselves or intend to harm themselves or have harmed themselves. And then of course, what your referral network looks like, not only within your school or district, but within your community. So usually it's a whole layout from kind of step one, how the progression of this case maybe evolves, all the way to referring to those outside agencies. I'm going to stop for questions there, and that'll round out your section 2 prevention requirements for your Safe Schools plan. And don't hesitate as we go through the presentation. We'll pause at the end of this presentation before we close if things do come up. Your protection measures, what do you actually have in place? So these are things starting from your access control. When you think about how you gain access onto your campuses, what safety measures have you taken, from perimeter fencing to locked doors? There may just be one kind of entrance and exit. You may have some double vestibule entry systems with some call buttons to signal someone to open up those doors. Your standoff distances from parking lots to fencing, how far away are things before an individual can gain access into the school building, and then your visitor management system, your check-in procedures. So that's in a section called access control, and again, within the Safe Schools guidance document, there are some resources and ideas to consider. Then you'll be asked to provide your facility safety plan. And so this one are things that you routinely do just to make sure your campus is safe, your walkthroughs, right? Your windows, your fire alarms, are they functioning? Is there anything lurking that could cause a safety hazard to students and staff? Usually your custodians are do their weekly walkthroughs or monthly. Assistant principals or principals may do this. And then you may do a more formal year safety plan as you open up those doors and do those real thorough walkthroughs. And in our school safety, PED school safety guidance document, there's a provided checklist to consider and include when you do your safety checklist. And then PED also recommends a security assessment, also known as a vulnerability assessment. You can do this with your Safe Schools Committee, or you can invite an expert like Palms and Associates to kind of get a third-party review of those security assessments that threats and hazards may impact your campus, that you may have not identified yet, that they're calling to your attention. So there's the safety assessment that's required, and then we recommend a security assessment. And again, looking at the guidance document, we have developed what those two could be about. Then you have to provide internet safety. Now, please know, internet safety isn't your school's checklist of how to check out computers or laptops. Internet safety is providing guidance to staff and parents of the harms of media, the lurkings of what could be on the World Wide Web, and how to avoid those threats and hazards. And the involvement parents have to monitor that. And again, there's some resources provided in our Safe Schools document. And then you have to include, a part of your protection measures, if you have on-campus school security personnel. That could be private security, that could be school security personnel that your districts have hired on, or your MOUs with your local law enforcement agencies for school resource officers. So you have to detail your framework, the roles in providing that protection, and how they evolve into your response and recovery. Now, if you don't have security on your campuses, maybe they're at the high school and not the elementary or what have you, you just indicate there's no security provided at this particular school site. And then that'll round out your section 3. Questions?
The question is there a facility safety plan assessment form?
There is. In the appendix of your school safety guide, there is, gosh, I want to say it's about 10 pages. It's a very thorough assessment on exactly your look-fors. We get into mitigation. This is where you're going to collect what I say your data, right? You're going to identify threats and hazards to avoid or reduce the severity or impact of a threat or hazard. So this is where I call my data finding, my digging. And so let's go through each of these assessments of which you have to keep in mind that help shape your Safe Schools plan. First one is a threats and hazards assessment. You'll sit with your emergency manager or a first responder, an expert in the field, and there's a form provided by PED in the guidance document to assess in your area, specific to your school, your location, your region, those threats and hazards that are likely to impact your school site. And so there's a rubric of what would highly impact you to what is kind of like a long shot. We won't see minimal, we'll see minimal or no threat impacting our campus. And so there's a template in Appendix B of our Safe Schools Guide, and you want to invite your Safe Schools Committee to help inform that assessment, and then of course provide those outcomes to your staff for continued dialogue. So this picture says kind of your risks ahead, right? You're just kind of predicting what you may know has already impacted. So those rise to the priority level of getting a very informed plan in place, to those with minimal impact or that may, be of less consideration for your Safe Schools plan. Your Safe Schools plan is asking you to design a behavioral threat assessment team and use a behavioral threat assessment protocol. The primary purpose of the school threat assessment is to prevent targeted violence in schools by students. So as we had the crisis intervention team really analyze information if a student is a harm to themselves, this one is analyzing information and designing a protocol if a student is a threat to others. So there's two different teams, your crisis intervention teams and your behavioral threat assessment teams. And so you want to create a team, discuss your protocols, forms that you use once you are aware of information that a student is posing a threat to others. You want to understand the training you need in which you want to inform your practices and build your capacity. And PED partners with the U.S. Department of Ed REM Center to provide the behavioral threat assessment training. So we'll be doing that in the fall virtually to your team. So we'll send out information about that. And then we also partner with the Office of the Attorney General, who has an initiative out of a grant with a Safe to Tell app they were hoping to launch in the fall. And so, but you may have another protocol at your school site that if students are aware of information, there's a safe way to communicate that. So think kind of through that with your school safety committee. Do we provide ways of anonymous reporting when students, staff, parents are aware of a threat? Could be of a student element or any other, but the Safe to Tell app by the Attorney General's office is hopefully coming soon. The next assessment is your culture and climate assessment. School officials, you're very used to these, and there's always a school safety element to your culture and climate assessment, and that's just getting feedback from your key stakeholders, right? Your students, your staff, your parents, have they assessed safety at your school? So it usually starts off with, do you feel, as students, do you feel safe at school? Why or why not? And then you'll start to ask other questions, more targeted questions of why they would not feel safe, things you want to be aware of. So if they're saying to you that bullying is a problem, you may want to reflect on your bullying protocols and programs and really enhance that and have an open dialogue about that, things of that nature. So the culture and climate assessment should help inform your safe schools plans and prioritize maybe some of your school community concerns. When you're going to, in your safe schools plan, provide the results of those questions and discuss how this assessment informed your safe schools plan. Did you do anything different? Did you refine your safe schools plans according to the feedback in which you received? Then there's the capacity assessment. This assessment examines the capabilities of staff as well as the services and resources of community partners that could be available to schools during an emergency. So there's an inventory list, an assessment your staff can fill out, and it just says, hey, I have training and experience in first aid, in CPR, in stop the bleed. I may be a volunteer firefighter in the community, and I have some skill set that could be utilized during an emergency. Again, as first responders, you're going to have to buy yourself some time until those, as immediate responders, you're going to have to buy some time until those first responders get to you, right? And we know time is precious, especially if you have to employ those first aid, CPR, stop the bleed skill sets to provide supports to students and staff. So this is your way, school officials, to kind of assess where you can call on staff until those first responders get to you. Or really, if the first responders get to you, they could be of assistance as well. So you want to provide a summary of those results. So if you have, 50 school staff on campus, who has what, and you'll give a summary of those results in your Safe Schools plan. Again, there's that assessment for each staff member to fill out to inform those results in the PED guidance document. This one is important, hence why your special ed expert sits on your Safe Schools committee, your access and functionality assessment. As you develop your Safe Schools plans, you have students who require additional support. So as you work with your special education teachers, parents, and students, understanding what those needs are going to be critical to informing your Safe Schools plans and those key roles and responsibilities you have for your school staff. Of course, your first responders would also want to know, not by name, but just who would need some extra support and resources as they arrive on campus as well, and how they could be support of those students and staff. In your Safe Schools plan, you're going to mention your protocol of how this is developed. You could do it within an IEP. You could meet with parents at that time and students to talk about during an emergency, what are those needs and what supports would we need to provide and who's the assigned staff to do so. And so you're going to articulate your protocol that has informed this section. And of course, not using students' name, just some general information of what those needs are on your campus. And that rounds out the mitigation section of the Safe Schools plan.
There are no questions right now.
Okay, and again, each one of these assessments have some samples and templates in the Safe Schools guide. Now we get to the response. When we did preventative protective mitigation, it's the actual processes, procedures, programs you have implemented at your school. Now, Section 4 response is how you intend to respond, right? Those protocols, those procedures in which you're going to train and conduct drills and exercises around that are going to help shape your response. And as a former coach, I always say in our response and in those practice drills, we're going to play like we practice. So as we go through each of these items, think about how you've designed them, how you've trained and built staff and students' capacity, and how they're ready to execute if a threat or hazard were to impact your campus. So the first thing you're going to do in this section is identify your school's incident command system and your district incident command system. There are very specific roles and responsibilities to execute protective actions. And so FEMA has some online training of ICS. PED is requiring that the individual who serves as incident commander provide evidence of having attended the training. And then of course it's recommended for all roles if you sit in an incident command position, but your incident commander could articulate what those roles and responsibilities are, or you could attend the training itself, or twofold, you can do both. But PED is requiring that your incident commander minimally have that FEMA 100 IS training, which is provided online. And we have a link on our PED Safe and Healthy Schools Bureau website to take you to that training. And then your Safe Schools plan, you want to develop your protective actions. And this is where your drills and procedures come into play. What do you do during a lockdown, a shelter in place, an evacuation at your primary and secondary location, and then your active shooter protocol? And so I normally or typically see what the principal will do or the incident commander, and then what staff or teachers and students will do. It's also helpful to inform what do your secretaries do, what do your counselors do, what do your custodians do. Really develop your plan where all staff are responding and have a role and responsibility in some way. And I know they do. So as you look at each of these protective actions, you definitely want to not only articulate what your principal and teachers and students are doing, but all the other staff on your campus to support this protective action. Your active shooter training and dates in which you provide it to your staff also need to be articulated. And so I'm sure you have partners who provide that training to you, and you identify who those partners are, the name of the training, and then when staff has been provided the training. The other thing that this section in protective action is asking is that you avoid using code words, that when you call a protective action, you just call what you're calling, right? Lockdown, shelter in place. We no longer use code blue, code green. We no longer use code coyote. I mean, there was a number of code names that in previous we may have used, those need to be eliminated in your Safe Schools plan and just call the protective action what it is. And here we go with the all hazards approach. If you have looked at the rubric, you're going to see in the rubric and in the Safe Schools plan, they're going to call a hazard, and then you're going to have to identify what protective action you're going to call, and then any additional steps in which you need to take. So if you look at your rubric, the first one is if you had an animal on campus, right? So usually you're going to call that protective action. There's an animal on campus. We're going to go into shelter in place. You don't need to reiterate what that shelter in place is, right? You've just given it that to me in that protective action. You're just going to identify that protective action, name it, shelter in place, and any additional steps you may take when there's an animal on campus, for example. You may have to call animal control, so on and so forth until that threat is removed. And so there's a list, and I'll kind of read a few off for you. Animal on campus, bomb threat, explosion, fallen aircraft, fire, loss of power, missing child. So as you look at the threat in which we're asking you to call a protective action, you'll also articulate additional steps. You're also going to include transportation emergencies, so don't forget about those as our students are either coming to school or leaving school home. An emergency should happen. What are those protocols in place? Or if they're on a field trip, right? You want to have some safety measures in place and protocol in place to address those emergencies. And then, of course, you need to articulate your communication plan, your notification and messaging. It's important to inform parents and guardians, first and foremost, that you're conducting emergency drills and what procedures look like. And then, of course, what are your plans when an actual event actually takes place? I shouldn't say an actual drill. This should also mean an actual event is taking place that is impacting your campus and you're in one of those protective actions. So there are samples in our Safe Schools Guide of letters that could go home, some templates you could use to inform parents of what those protocols you're going to take, how they're going to be informed should a real event happen. And then you're going to articulate your media relationship, right? You're going to identify your public information officer, how information is going to be disseminated, and this could be multifold, right? You could go on the radio, you could go live on a TV station, you're going to do your web pages, you're going to send out a blast robocall or text messaging. And so you want to articulate every measure of your communication plan, how your PIO and your school officials are going to get information out and what those protocols are. The other thing with response is you're also going to articulate the partnership in which you have with your emergency manager and your first responders. So go back to when you are going to share this plan with your emergency manager, your local fire department, your local law enforcement agency, and others that help shape this. You're also going to invite them to the table because, again, they have some expertise in this field to help shape your responses as well. So please, please, I encourage you to invite them to the table and review what you have laid out. So I'm going to stop there for questions.
Okay. They were wanting to know about the trainings, if they can, where do they find that and how do they register for those?
Mm-hmm. So at the end of this poll, I'm at the end of this session, I'm going to run a poll of what trainings you are requesting. And then between myself and, of course, and our multi-agency partners, we will start to shape those trainings virtually and then hopefully, as we've done in the past, those in-person trainings. So really I'll assess what the need is. And so there are times where we hold statewide trainings, or we go to your particular district for a particular training you have brought to our attention that is in need. And so, and then of course, you just reach out to my office as well. If you don't see anything that we posted on our website or via my emails, we can also bring a training to your school, again, virtually or eventually in person. And so we do have with our Safe Schools Advisory Council from the Department of Health, like I said, to the Attorney General's Office to Homeland Security, will already provide a series, may look a little bit differently coming this year, of trainings for your school staff.
Perfect. There was a couple of comments. There was an animal on campus. When I called my school about this, they acted like that wasn't a concern. So I'm sure that's probably happens to other people.
It does, and it really
They
depends on some of your,
agreeing that that's a real concern. Yeah.
yeah, it is, and then really depending on your location. I have schools that have bears on campus, or have,
Right.
you know, these snakes and critters that just really can pose harm, wild coyotes, dogs, you name it. And so there should be a detailed protective action and measures taken until that school staff or leader deems that the campus is back safe and we could operate as usual. So it is a big, just depending on what element is lurking on your campus.
Yeah, and so there's other people agreeing with that and saying that kids always go up to pet them and they have to call animal control, and there doesn't seem to be a follow-up, because the animal control is swamped too, and the police have been dispatched. And then another person commented at their school, there's been excellent support for animal control. So I'm sure there's a wide range of dealing with animal issues throughout the state.
Absolutely, and always use your emergency manager as another resource to advocate, right? So if you're seeing some deficiencies, some just kind of overall concerns with these protective actions as a community of how you're responding, that's why you want to bring those key individuals to the table, right? Talk about some of these concerns that may have not played out as well as you would have hoped. And that's the area for improvement, refinement, talking about resources and additional protocols that may need to be implemented. And if one entity doesn't respond, who's your fallback? Things of that nature. And again, depending on where you're situated, some resources are more limited than others. So I do know some areas of our state have more difficulty. Then we get to the recovery section of your plan. So once you have responded to a threat and hopefully have taken care of that threat or hazard, and you're on to the recovery phase. You first are, sorry, there's a typo on my slide. This is the, no, it is the relocation and reunification team. Sorry, no, it's correct. I thought I've misinformed this slide. These teams are going to help shape how you're going to respond during recovery. And again, in your Safe Schools Guide, this section really details those roles, responsibilities, and considerations. So I'm sorry, it's a reunification, relocation and reunification. So in your relocation, this is where your emergency drills come in and your overall protective responses, right? If you had to relocate students and staff either to your primary or secondary location, have you practiced and trained on that? And what are those elements in which you need to embed, from accountability to communication to those protocols to assess that you got from point A to point B successfully? I do want to reiterate your secondary relocation site should be on foot, ideally. So I hear some schools will need to wait for transportation. And so that, of course, could cause delay and dilemma of removing students away from that threat and hazards. So think about how far off you could move staff and students in an identified secondary site, and then call for transportation maybe to move to a third site far, far away from the campus. So as it's intended, your relocation, obviously primary, you're kind of spilling out of your school, right? Fields, the blacktop in front of the school, you're just getting out of the school building in the immediacy. And then the secondary site is taking you as far as you can on foot away from that site. Sometimes that's where the reunification can happen. Other times, because of remoteness, schools will have to get transportation to transport. And so I just want you to be careful as you identify your secondary site that it is one on foot if it is deemed safe to walk. I have some rural districts that say we can't go on foot. We're surrounded by arroyos and treacherous terrain, and so we have to wait for school buses to come get us. And so I know there's some intricate dilemmas that you have that you're up against, but as a protocol, both primary and secondary should be on foot. Your notification plan, this in the recovery is different from what you did in a general protective action. This notification plan, it could add to that previous notification. This is where you want to inform parents where you actually have relocated. It could just be you're still on campus, but now you need to reunify families, or you have gone to your secondary or third identified site and you're giving them some specific guidance of how to reunify with their child. And so you should always give your parents kind of a heads up of what that plan looks like. So usually we see this disseminated during registration, newsletters. It could be a part of a handbook of some kind, but how do you communicate the plan to parents? And again, it could be multifold. You could have it in various documents and various approaches. So think of those notifications as two different things or as an add-on. Don't leave those ones out. And then of course, as you're at your reunification site, how have you mapped out reunifying families, right? Your accountability and custody of students, list what's needed, what staff needs to consider in their roles and responsibilities. Have you mapped it out for your school staff, for your district staff? So once you are at the relocation site and you see a picture there, who's manning the front table? As parents are coming to you and you're checking off that your checkout procedures, do you have runners as teachers are watching students to go call on students? Who's doing traffic control? Who's handling the media? So on and so forth. And so in our Safe Schools plan, there's some templates, some resources of how you map it out. And this is where you want to call your emergency manager, those first responders. Those people are going to help support that reunification process as well, right? We're going to be a unified team here. It's going to be all hands on deck. And so this is an area where you could provide those tabletop exercises away from students. You could use a staff in service and walk down to your secondary relocation site and practice those roles and responsibilities of how you want to reunify these families, right? You don't want to wait till the moment in which there's an actual event to start figuring that out. You want a really solid plan prior to an actual event happening. And hopefully, you wouldn't have to utilize it. But it is good to practice to make staff aware of what their role is, what they're responsible for hopefully this smooth process. And I know it's easier said than done, and it's a daunting task, but if you practice, if you plan, hopefully things will go smoother than not. This section also calls for your COOP plan, your continuous operating your continuity of operations and planning, right? You're gonna highlight, as we're in the throes now, if schools can't operate as it traditionally has, what are those measures you're taking? So right now, we know that we need to provide food to students. So we have our food service COOP plan, and we have our academic and instruction COOP plan, right? Our remote learning. So prior to our pandemic, this was kind of a hard concept to think about what threat or hazard could impact our campus where we couldn't continue our day-to-day operation. Now we're becoming experts in this area. So in our Safe Schools plan, it highlights a protocol just to make those decisions, right? It's so hard to think of every scenario that's going to prevent us from operating as business as usual, but there should be a decision planning process and administrators' consideration that informs a COOP plan. So you want to include that. And now that you have become experts, there are some things that you can do, like food services, like academic support. So detail what your district has come up with, those plans, those resources you've identified to enhance your COOP plan. The Department of Homeland Security also provides training in COOP. So those are things that are online now with the U.S. Department of Education REM Center, that you can take an online course if you want to continue to develop your COOP plans. And then your psychological and emotional recovery. We know that any threat or hazard at a great scale, even a short scale, could have some short-term, long-term support needed to be provided to your staff and students. And that's where you're going to call on your health experts to help inform this plan. So for example, you might already be doing that with our COVID-19 pandemic, that we know students are being impacted from staying at home this extended time by not being able to be social and about, that they have been emotionally impacted by our state of affairs. They may have been impacted by a death in their family because of COVID-19, so on and so forth. And so I know your health professionals in your region, within your school district, are already thinking through providing support to those students and reaching out to them. This is where you kind of detail your protocol. Who are your partners? How do you assess the need? And what are those measures you take within your school site and within your local, regional, or state resources to provide support to your students and families. And again, in our Safe Schools Guide, there's a template protocol and who you can collaborate with. Offhand, the Department of Health has experts who would be willing to provide guidance and support and resources. So don't hesitate to reach out to them as well. So response and recovery are heavy just with information in detail, but try to be succinct in your narrative and articulate, again, kind of those hard and fast facts, nuts and bolts. Again, this document should be useful to you, to your first responders. And so try to be as streamlined as you can as you articulate your plans in the Safe Schools document. And again, please reach out to me if you feel like you need any support in developing any one of these areas. So here are, we have some links on our website for resources and recommended trainings. I know that was an earlier question. Here's a list that I have provided just for a quick glance. You may identify other supports, but these are ones that we routinely provide to school districts, whether it's a statewide, regional offering, or we can go to individual districts, or we have. Again, most of these now will be online through the various agencies, and we'll provide those links. So my school administrators and staff, we know that we have a professional and legal responsibility for emergency preparedness, right? How we respond will matter. And so in working with our legal counsel, they always say to over-prepare is kind of your best bet, because as we know, with any threat, hazard, or however we choose to respond, we will be questioned in the end. Did we take the appropriate measures? Did we articulate our due diligence in how we try to prevent, protect, mitigate, and did we have a reasonable plan to respond and recover? So again, think through each of your elements of your Safe Schools plan. We are responsible to ensure that actions are taken to protect students and staff. Your school community is going to rely on you for your preparedness, your preparation, and your response. So ask yourselves, first and foremost, do we have an approved Safe Schools plan? And has that Safe Schools plan been vetted by experts in the field? And have I included and trained all staff on how to respond to a threat or hazard? And sometimes these elements can take a back seat with kind of competing priorities on campus. I absolutely understand that. And so you're trying to figure out within staff meetings and in services and things of that nature when you're going to embed it all in, since there's only so many minutes in a day. But I do ask that you reflect on your diligent protocol, how you've documented, obviously not only protect staff and students, but if you're questioned, that you have the necessary documents to convey your due diligence in protecting your campus. So know the law, know district policies and procedures, and also know the limitations to coordinate efforts and reach out to those professionals to mitigate those limitations. So I want to play a video for you, and this is one video that we sometimes use with schools during a tabletop exercise or just to get kind of our school safety brain kind of working, right? And so we just talked about all the diligent measures in which we have to take to keep our schools safe. And this video kind of really demonstrates that we never want to say we could have, should have, would have, right? And be an afterthought of what we should have done to protect our campus. So Sandy Hook Promise, we all know the Sandy Hook incident with their active shooter. They are now a wealth of knowledge and resources, have provided trainings, videos and things that you could use with your staff to start those tabletop exercises and those critical conversations. This is one video that we use often that I like to play for you.
I'm here at the scene of tomorrow's shooting, where a 15-year-old will kill 4 children, 2 adults, and then turn the gun on himself.
When the shooting starts happening tomorrow, first I'll probably just think it's firecrackers or a car backfiring or something. He told some of us that his dad kept a gun in his closet, and he always talked about using it on, you know, the people that bullied him. Tomorrow I'll probably say that I wish I told someone.
You know, after the shooting, we're going to feel pretty bad about picking on him, but until then, we'll probably just keep doing it because he's pretty weird.
Tomorrow I'll probably point out that something has seemed off with him since the beginning of the school year.
And I'm now joined by the officers who will be the first responders tomorrow. What additional details can you share with us?
Well, someone is expected to tell us after the shooting that the shooter has been posting on social media about doing this for weeks.
So how will you explain the shooting to your daughter?
Actually, I won't get to explain it to her because she won't make it.
This is Christine Lynn, reporting from the scene of another shooting. We'll say we never saw coming.
Again, an excellent resource to, I can get out of this, sorry. An excellent resource to start those conversations with staff. This is just an example of one threat, obviously the one we fear the most, impacting our campus. There's other videos provided by Sandy Hook and other resources you'll find on PED's website that you could utilize in your trainings and in your discussions at school. Yeah, moving on for tips for a successful approval process. So in August, you'll be receiving an email from me, and I will give you the Safe Schools rubric. I will send you the link to the Safe Schools 2020 guidance document, and you'll start to kind of work with your Safe Schools committee. I know now it'll be like we're very much doing now via Zoom. I absolutely realize no one's meeting in person, but if you could start to think about identifying who's going to sit on your Safe Schools committee and when those meetings can happen virtually to discuss what you currently have in place in your Safe Schools guide, to look at the Safe Schools requirement using that rubric first and foremost as a guide of what you need to ensure is embedded in the Safe Schools guide, and start to talk about roles and responsibilities, right? This is a collaborative effort. Again, not only your school staff, but your emergency manager and first responders. Start thinking about when an initial meeting can happen and some follow-up so that when we get to December, that you are uploading your Safe Schools plan. So I encourage you to organize your Safe Schools plan according kind of to the table of contents as you look at the rubric or each section so that your reviewer will have an easy time kind of finding the information. If you choose not to design your Safe Schools plan as we outlined from the introduction section all the way to recovery, please use some key words that we do in our rubric. So if we need to do a find, it's going to take us right to that information. Each Safe Schools plan needs to be tailored to the school and detail how the school has prepared and intends to respond to specifics. And so I know, again, that districts have some uniform protocol, especially if you're a very large district, and that is fine, especially in response and recovery. For example, if Albuquerque is up for review, I know that working closely with your administrators, that they have trained on very specific protocols, and that's fine. But your school may have unique programming, especially in preventative or in protective. You have your very own assessments you're doing in mitigation. So please, even though you have some uniformed approaches with your district, you also have some unique set of staff resources, programming that you want to articulate in your Safe Schools plan. So I often get the question, can a district just give PED their district's guidance document? And we say no. Per statute, each school needs an individualized Safe Schools plan articulating their staff, their training, and the roles in which they play, and of course, what resources and programming and training has been provided to students and staff. So as you work through and update your Safe Schools plan, please make sure we have actual information, names of staff, buildings, locations, community resources and supports. Did you provide a training? What was the name of the training? Who participated in that training? What are the dates of those trainings? If you're meeting with your crisis intervention teams, behavioral threat assessment teams, Safe School Committee, do you have meeting times, and how frequently do you meet? So you can provide that level of detail in your Safe Schools plan, in addition to the other elements we've asked for. Be selective how you reiterate PED's guidance document. I always say PED acknowledges the importance of emergency preparedness. We're well aware of definitions and language and requirements, so you don't need to reiterate that in your Safe Schools plan and do a cut and paste. So I always say be selective. There are resources and best practices you can adopt, and so you want to make sure it makes sense for your school, your staff, and your set of circumstance, resources, location. So you're using that guide as just that, a guiding document to inform your Safe Schools plan. In previous, Safe Schools plans were mailed to PED, whether on a disk or a USB thumb drive. PED in my office has since developed what's called an FTP secure online platform, where you will now be provided from our IT manager. You'll get an email from Tomas Aguirre, so keep that name in mind. He is going to mail superintendents your secure username and password for our secure online platform, so that you can upload, you can have an internal process, superintendents with your principals and others who are in charge of Safe Schools plans, where they submit to an individual, and then one individual uploads on the FTP platform, or superintendents, you can share the username and passwords with your principal. Again, this is confidential information, so that they can upload their own document. So if your Safe Schools plans principals are due December 5th and you're not the one uploading, you may have an internal process where they need to be due prior to that for review by your superintendents or others, and then someone else may upload it. So think about those internal protocols so that PED does receive your Safe Schools plans by December, uploaded on our FTP site. So please keep in mind, you are not mailing us your Safe Schools plan, and you are never going to email your Safe Schools plan, whether that's to PED or each other. You need to keep these as confidential and off as possible. And then again, as I work with each of the principals and school districts, I will be making sure that you know who your emergency manager is for your region. I work closely with the Emergency Managers Association, and so I'm in constant communication with emergency managers and do presentations with emergency managers, that they are a resource to you and need to be a collaborative partner as you develop your Safe Schools plan. And then of course, your first responders. So be looking at, as I send out your Safe Schools plan guidance documents and rubrics, I'll also be giving you contact information for your emergency manager. In the event you don't have it, you may already have established partnership, but I will do that in addition to giving out the documents. Let's take another poll. So on a scale of 1 to 10, after hearing the information that needs to be embedded in your Safe Schools plan, how confident are you with updating and completing your Safe plan, your Safe Schools plan for PED review? 10 being very confident, like, yes, I understand each of the elements. I'm prepared to have those conversations with my staff. There may be some fine tuning we need, but I fully understand what is required of us. 2, I'm still unsure what's required of us, and there's just a lot of work to be done. Looks like we're somewhere in the middle, like we're getting this, and that's, again, when I say, as you know, as we are in our roles as educators, and school safety has risen to the top of our priority list, we're continuing to build our capacity, so we're partners at the table with you to do so. So the next poll is going to help inform how I prioritize trainings in which we offer. So what trainings can PED offer to support staff in their role as immediate responders? And so I gave a list. It could be all of the above, and you're eager to engage in all trainings, or you know, there are just a few in which you feel like you need to attend, or your staff needs to attend to build their capacity. So we have from behavioral threat assessment to crisis intervention training, CPI training, how to skills to de-escalate and redirect behaviors, social emotional learning activities and lessons, ICS, mental health first aid, stop the bleed, active shooter training. We didn't talk about fortifying a classroom, and as you know, that's in the event of a lockdown, active shooter, and you're locking down. It's how staff and students secure that room. We've seen where you know, students have been trained to pull up filing cabinets and desks up against the door, how they secure the windows, things of that nature. So if you would like more training in providing to your staff to then provide training to students on how to fortify a classroom or office, we can do that through Palms and Associates. So what's rising to the top for me is behavioral threat assessment, and we'll work closely with the U.S. Department of Education to offer that training to you. CPI, I know that many school districts have trained the trainer in CPI, so we'll assess who has what resources and then provide additional training for those that don't have an actual trainer on site. And then the social emotional learning activities, I think, is at the very top. And within our Safe and Healthy Schools Bureau, we do have an individual, Leslie Kelly, who could assist districts with that, and so we'll collaborate with her on that need. And if you look at our Safe and Healthy Schools Bureau website, we have already started to develop the social emotional page to provide resources in lessons and activities for you. So already you can start to look at our website. So I'm going to stand for any last questions, Leah, because that will conclude my presentation. And I think we have a few more minutes.
Okay. This one says our community just experienced an unfortunate event that 2 of our students were involved in an accident. One of the students passed away. The other one is in critical condition in ICU. Is there a way the school can offer recovery for the students that may have issues or just need to figure out how to mourn and grieve? I know it's difficult with COVID and it's being summer. What would you suggest?
Right. We had a presentation and a partner at the SHII conference, Leah, and help me, it was the grief.
The Children's Grief Center, I believe, is the name of that.
Yes, yes, yes. So Veronica, I'm sure we have that resource for the Children's Grief Center, those experts who could provide supports and services to this community, obviously, as well as the Department of Health. They have some agencies within the department that could provide. Shana and Victoria are ones that come to mind. And so already in our SHII conference, when you look at the resource lists, as you get to the main SHII page, those could be of immediate support, and of course, reaching out to those in your regional or local communities. And I'm sorry to hear about the accident and the loss and the impact it's had on your community. So that's what comes to mind in the immediacy. And then I have my contact email, if you want to email me directly, I can start working with my bureau to provide additional links and resources to those experts in the field.
Great. And there was a question about our trainings offered online now, and I think you had already spoken to that.
And we're gonna have to really enhance our webpage on the Safe and Healthy Schools Bureau to provide those links as we work with agencies developing those virtual online trainings. So bear with us a bit, but that's in the works for sure.